So that's part of the conversation today. My name is Chris Burns, and despite my California accent, je suis un Européen. And so I have a stake in this too. And I have a stake in this too because my kids are teenagers and they also are looking for work-life balance and the right to disconnect. I was a journalist for a long time, still am sometimes. And you know, getting those rocket emails from the mothership at 2 in the morning was a pain. And sometimes they could have waited until the next morning, but they didn't. And they copied in 15 people. So you feel this pressure, this obligation to answer. No, and that people burn out, and that's what's been happening. The beauty of having that online work during COVID, I love that. But then the dark side. We got to talk about the dark side. How do you deal with that? About being able to disconnect, so you're not constantly, you don't have a wire in your skin constantly, prompting you to answer. Anyway, so Socialists and Democrats, S&D, organizing this event, hoping to jumpstart the legislation on that. We got so close to getting it over the mark, but we didn't. There was a breakdown in the social dialogue. That's very important. So stress burnout levels since COVID have been up, and especially with this remote working digital transition. In a number of countries already, there is a right to disconnect. It is law, including in Spain. We're going to hear about that from Spain as well, and from Belgium. And so it exists. But we want to make this work EU-wide, the EU 27 to adopt this and to make it work. And today, ça tombe bien, it's a perfect day to do this because today there's the European pillar, what do we call it again? The social dialogue, the social summit, social dialogue summit, is that it? Right? And that, they're going to sign an agreement about dialogue, about social rights. And this should be a part of it, at least implicitly. Anyway, let's get to our speakers. Our speakers include S&D. They will be the European Commission. Hopefully, Commissioner Schmidt will be here. Trade unions, employers. Can we make this? Can we do this during this mandate? That is a big question as well. So we want to get your questions as well. All you got to do is press the button there. We got 5 languages interpretation. Thanks to your hard work out there behind the glass. We're thinking with you. Also important not to speak too fast so they can translate. Very important. And hashtag right to disconnect. Please tweet like a beast on this issue that we are here and project that as far as you can with that hashtag right to disconnect. Let's start with Alex. Alex Agios-Saliba. Alex, welcome. You are S&D Group Vice President. You were the rapporteur on the lead negotiator, right, on the right to disconnect. Also on the Digital Services Act, which is kind of linked to that as well, from Malta. And in Malta, you were head of the labor youth wing. So you very much, you get it among youth that they want work-life balance in their careers now. The demand, I think, is especially high among youth in Europe, isn't it, Alex?
It's definitely, it is definitely. Thanks, Chris. Thanks to Agne and also to Esther for being able to be here today on this very important day. I think it is very significant that today we will be kickstarting the Val d'Uixelles Social Dialogue Summit. I think it is very significant for us to be here today and also to send a very strong message. There is no more time to waste. And ultimately, this is also significant for us as an S&D group, because ultimately we have been the political group in the European Parliament who introduced the idea 4.5 years ago here in the European Parliament. I think it was one of our initial priorities here since the very start of the mandate, where we approved the right to disconnect as being a priority for our S&D family. in the very initial weeks of the legislature, and then we continue to push within the Employment Committee, taking it up all the way to the plenary, leading the negotiations on the right to disconnect. And we started doing this before we experienced the social experiment that no one was thinking about, the COVID pandemic, which put us in a state whereby 1 in 3 workers within our workforce, whereby before we had only 5% of our workforce whoever worked remotely, whoever experienced telework. We ended up in a situation, so after we started the whole discussion about the right to disconnect, we ended up in a situation where 1 in 3 in our workforce started working, smart working, teleworking, working from different places, flexi working, etc. So this fine line between working time and family time, rest time, started to be blurred more than ever before. The social pandemic experiment passed now. We are post-pandemic, hopefully, but still the effects of digitalization on our workforce is still there. Therefore, as I said, we started pushing for this idea when we only had 5% of our workforce, which was teleworking, which was smart working, which was flexi working. Now with the realities that we are having today, it is much more important. We have waited enough. We had a very strong message in the plenary when we voted for the right to disconnect. We had a very good majority, an absolute majority in the plenary, who voted despite a lot of pressures that we had from many different lobbyists from outside the European Parliament, pressuring our MEPs. But we voted strongly on the right to disconnect. We were very clear also a few weeks ago when we had Commissioner Schmidt with us, and it is not something very usual, Chris, where we had all the political groups in the plenary speaking with one voice and telling the European Commission, you have to act now, as soon as possible. The ball is in the Commission.
So what happened? You were so close. What happened?
So what we need, the social dialogue that we were mentioning in the beginning of my intervention failed last November. So now it is very clear. Commission President Ursula von der Leyen was very clear in the very start of this mandate. She will not ignore legislative initiatives of the European Parliament. And this was a European Parliament legislative initiative. We waited for social dialogue because social dialogue is a fundamental pillar of our legislation that we have approved in the European Parliament. We are basing the right to disconnect on social dialogue. We know the different realities in our member states. We know that we have, for a strong right to disconnect, we have to have a strong social dialogue. But ultimately, social dialogue failed because employers moved out of these discussions. So now the ball is in the Commission's court. We had a very clear message from Commissioner Schmidt, who said that the Commission will act, but we want the Commission, and I'm going to reply to your question, to act as soon as possible during this legislature, because we are facing another pandemic. We are facing a mental health pandemic, and ultimately the high rise in mental health issues in our workforce, and this is an occupational health and safety issue for us. The burnouts, depression, fatigue, this ever-connected culture that we are facing, this is a reality for our workforce. Therefore, we should not lose more time. The Commission must act, and this is the message that we want to put out today, especially, and going back, and I'm going to conclude on this. I'm coming from youth campaigning, and this is a priority for our younger generation. They know how difficult it is to switch off after long working days. And the pressure that they have, that they feel that they must be more competitive on their job. They should continue to work. This is a reality. It's not only an issue that your boss, your employer, is obliging you to continue to work even during weekends, even during your rest time. But the reality is a social reality that we are facing. This is not the social model that we want. We don't want a social model that is protecting workers in Portugal, in France, in Spain, and is not protecting the rest of our workforce. So that is why the right to disconnect is so important. And that is why we are here today. There is no more time to waste.
Great, excellent. Alex, and we're going to talk at the end of this, we'll have a chat about where we are from that point, about what we heard during this conference, and where do we go from here. So we'll get back to you at the end. That's great. Thank you, Alex. Let's go to Agnes Jongerius, S&D coordinator in the Employment Committee. And Agnes, you know, from what we discussed just now, it's a question really, as Alex was talking about. You know, you're on a temporary contract. You have a contract there. Maybe you're a little bit worried that you're going to be able to. Can you extend it? There's that pressure. How can you set your foot down and say, I need to have the right to disconnect? We need this legislation, right?
I think so. I think if you look at indeed our labor market, especially the labor market for young people, but I must say also, let's say you lose your job when you are end 40s and then have to find a new job opening. For most people, that also means going to an agency, a temporary agency, and start all over again with temporary contracts, with all the anxiety around it. And there, I think for everyone, it's difficult to say no.
Sure.
Because I think in general, people just like to please. So if you got a question, you are tempted to say yes. But if you think, if I don't say yes, my job will be on the line, that would be really putting a lot of pressure. And Alex rightfully already pointed out to the big stress issue, the mental health issues we are facing at the moment. And that indeed you don't need to be a rocket scientist to relate this to indeed this never being able to say no again, always on again, always stressed, always combining tasks. Perhaps you are just Netflixing and at the same time have to check your emails if there is something you need to be done. So I think it's related, yes.
Yeah, so this is about empowerment, isn't it? Giving an employee the power to say no, actually, to have that thing in their back pocket that says, hey, wait a minute.
Yeah, and I think it's also a little bit restoring the balance, because it's nearly 40 years ago when I started my work in the trade union movement. Then I was working for the transport union, and there were some people who are responsible for rescuing ships in the sea. And they had to have this, we called it a beeper. A beeper.
Okay.
So they, for instance, they were working in Vlissingen. They were on call. So they had to be able to be at their ship for rescue within half an hour. And my first negotiations were on how much are they getting paid to be on call from this beeper. And it was at the same time that for my first strike action, we got permission to go to this business center of our telecom provider, where we can, and they called it a mobile phone, but it was really this big, because you need to be in contact with head office if anything is happening. And I know at the moment we were negotiating on this beeper, how much do I get for the beeper? People thought these are spoiled workers, but if you see how much has been changed, and how attractive it is also to look at your all of the time. I think people need protection. People need to be able to say, no, not now. And you should be able to do this whether you have a fixed-term contract or a flex contract. I think everyone needs to be able to say no every now and then.
And if you are on call, you need to be paid to be on call.
I think so.
There's also something implicit there, too,
yeah.
like you mentioned.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Okay, great. Well, stay with us. Esther, let's move. Sorry, Agnes.
Can I say something?
One more thing, yeah.
One more thing.
Because we got to move on.
Yeah, we're going to move on. But it's the birthday of Alex today. And he said it will be a good present if he got a commitment today that the Commission is going to present a proposal on the right to disconnect. And then Esther promised, in the meantime, that for his next birthday, we have the directive in place. So this is just managing expectations, giving a good birthday present to Alex.
Absolutely, absolutely. Thank you, Agnes. Let's move to our first panel, one step closer to the EU legislation on the right to disconnect. And let's begin with someone who's going to actually be at Val d'Uchaise today at that social dialogue summit. Esther Lynch, General Secretary of the European Trade Union Confederation, ETUC. I enjoyed your op-ed in December titled "A Warning to Scrooges Cut Long Working Hours." And what I liked about it, too, is that it wasn't just sort of saying, yeah, we need this, but there is a benefit here for businesses. You have more productive employees, right?
Yeah. Thanks so much. I really believe, Alex, we can get there by this time next year. So I think our first message exactly is this point that quality jobs are good for us, but bad jobs will literally kill us. So Alex is right. There is a strong health and safety dimension to this. A feature of a quality job is the right to disconnect. What we need is a directive, because we were close to developing a directive through social dialogue, and two of the employers walked away, but one didn't, and he's in the room, so I want to acknowledge that one of the employers was willing to continue to negotiate and land it. But that's gone now, off the table, not a possibility, and that means it moves straight back here, straight back to Alex, straight back to yourselves in the Parliament, straight back to the Commission, and I very much hope that they will come forward. We don't need to wait till the next term. We can already introduce the directive now and get working on it. And what does it need to do? Well, for the right to disconnect, it needs to do three things. First thing, an obligation on employers not to contact workers outside their working time. Clear obligation. Don't contact people outside their working time. Second, a right of workers not to be contactable outside of their working time. So we could go for the dual approach. And then thirdly, it needs to say that the modalities, how you achieve that, is done through collective bargaining with trade unions at the level of the enterprise or the sector. I see Jan Willemins here, and I'm very happy he's going to take the floor because he has an agreement for a particular sector that can advance. So, but that's the way in which we do it. A mandatory obligation on employers not to contact people outside their working time. A strong right, an enforceable right for workers not to be contactable. That means turning off your phone, or it means not looking at your emails, or whatever it means. But we need to approach it, both the obligation and the right, and then the modalities to be done through collective bargaining. Exactly how you achieve that to be done through collective bargaining, but without doubt it needs to be achieved. Then alongside that, it could be helpful to also deal with telework, because telework is another feature of what people want to see in a quality employment contract. But there are certain protections that need to be put in place for workers who are undertaking telework. And one of those protections is that they have the right to equal pay and treatment, the right to be equally considered for promotion, not to be discriminated against because they are teleworking. They need to have the right that their equipment is provided by their employer and the employer remains responsible for health and safety. There needs to be, workers need to be able to choose whether or not they telework. It can't be just put entirely up to workers or employers to choose whether or not you can telework, or that it's at the whim of Elon Musk or someone else whether you get to telework. That's not the way we do things in Europe. The way in which we do things in Europe is through dialogue. So a mandatory support for trade unions to launch requests for telework and to have those discussions result in agreements on telework. And then what we absolutely need to have is a strong right to privacy in the context of telework. We also need to be very clear, and I come to an end because I know you like short speeches. We also need to prevent things such as telework replacing sick leave. If you're on sick leave, you're on sick leave. You shouldn't be expected to do telework while you're on sick leave. I can't tell you the amount of meetings I turn up at and people say, I'm sorry, I can't turn on the camera because I'm sick in bed. Now, that's not the future. It's not the present. It's not fair and it's not right and it's contrary to all the rights that we already have. So telework, is not a replacement for sick leave visa. And also see Valeria has arrived, who I know is going to take the floor, but I want to acknowledge again, as I just did, that not all the employers walked away from the negotiations. You stayed the course and were willing to continue to negotiate and land it. And I think that's the type of leadership that will be in evidence today at Val d'Uchesse, because social dialogue isn't easy. It needs to be resourced. It needs people with courage. And to get there, we need more people like yourself, Valeria.
Thank you, Esther. and best of luck when you go to Val d'Uchesse. Hopefully you can slip in right to disconnect there when you sign. We'll see. Anyhow, why don't we go to a country that actually has that law, has a law on right to disconnect, and let's find out how well it's going. Jose Domingo Rosselló, head of macroeconomic and financial policies for the Spanish Prime Minister. And according to polls taken, it shows that the Spanish have the highest support to disconnect. So there is strong support among the people. And so how is that working now so far? It's been in place for how long now? I think a couple of years, right?
Hello to everyone. Thank you for having me. Regarding to the Spanish experience, the Spanish legislative bodies started to develop the right to disconnect as far as in 2018. There, in the organic law of data protection, it was defined for the first time what was the right to disconnect. Basically, it was defined around the right to enjoy the end of your work day or your holiday or any other period of rest. No, you can't be called during these periods, and you have the right to enjoy them. You have the right to say no. However, this was a very rough definition. And after that, in 2021, when we approved I think it is the first European law of telework conditions, there the opportunity was taken to try to develop and refine further certain aspects around the right to disconnect. Specifically, in the law of telework, and I want to emphasize that because this first refining was applied only to telework, it was established that the enterprise has the duty to guarantee the limitation of the use of technological medium or tools to connect. The enterprise has the duty to guarantee the disconnection and establish another kind of obligation for the enterprise. This is not specifically an obligation, it's kind of a directive, perhaps, in which it is said that the enterprises, the business, will elaborate an internal policy where should be specified what are the modalities in which this right to disconnect is actionable. this depends on the profession that you do, basically. No, it is not the same. Someone which is working in rescuing ships, or a journalist, or an economist, or something who works for the government, like me. I can assure you, as many other of you, perhaps even if we have interns here, that the right to disconnect is not always very well enforced and respected for the public administration, for example. If you are in a responsibility position, you should have the same right to disconnect that the next man. It is not, it is not what happens usually, no? Okay, and sorry, I drift a little bit here. The question regarding to telework law, the other thing that was established is that action about formation and sensibilization about the reasonable use of technological media. No? It was established in this telework law. It is not only the right to disconnect, it established a little bit that the conditions should be developed by the company, and the company should implement, design, perhaps even issue some directives to the chain of command on how to use responsibly the technological media to facilitate the disconnection. No? Basically, through these two legislative pieces, there is a consensus about there is still many problems to refine here. Perhaps because the law, a national law, is not good enough to enter and specify all the possibilities and all the varieties of how to exert the right to disconnect. No? We are aware of that. This is why collective bargaining is so important, because collective bargaining provides the appropriate institutionality to refine, to adapt, to actionate, to design this kind of action or this kind of how it is right to disconnect exerted. No? The problems we have found with the implementation of the law. First of all, it is difficult to enforce, very difficult to enforce. What you need first is a good working time registration, some kind of administrative process in which the hours that you are working in the company or at home are very well registered. No? The second difficulty is what we call, sorry, I'm going to use a word in Spanish because I don't know now the translation in English, porosidad of working time. Porosidad is, it is porousness. It's difficult, sometimes depends on the occupation, to distinguish when you are at work or not. This is, for example, when a taxi driver is waiting on a designated area to catch passenger, is he or is he not working, for example? When someone is, it is working. This specifically here, but of course, Esther.
Yeah, I mean, you're on call, right? You're on call.
You're
So
sitting in a taxi.
Yeah. There are other circumstances in which are you working or not? For example, if you are teleworking, if you are waiting to incorporate to a shift, whatever, depends on the occupation, this definition of working time, it is difficult to establish taxatively from a national law. It is much better to use the collective bargaining, which is perfectly adapted to the actual circumstance of the occupation, that provides the adequate tool to define exactly there, this is working time, there it is not, and things like that.
So Jose, you present the problematic, but in the last 2 years, in Spain, have you seen more of a right to disconnect exercised or not?
Well,
is there any way to measure that?
Yeah. It is. I will start for the second question. It is. There is a way to measure that. Measure is not the proper. Sorry, the proper concept here, because we cannot say how many people in a given time is exerting the right to disconnect or not. What we have in this aspect are examples of collective bargaining agreements. I don't know if Jose Varela, which is my colleague, is going to develop or elaborate further in the matter in the next. But there are many examples. The most let me quote one is the General Store collective bargaining agreement, in which it is the most refined piece of agreement in which a lot of condition and this collective bargaining agreement specifically elaborates, for example, how to do this action to sensibilize or to incentivize the reasonable use of technology. For example, it is said, use the delay answer in case of you are sending an email. Keep the meetings with the less people possible, if some people are on holidays. Respect the out of the office messages and deadlines, things like that. No, seems very reasonable once you put all of them together. No, but it has never been in a collective bargaining agreement since I think is last year. No, so can we measure it? No, but we feel that the thing is sinking into collective bargaining. So that will be, in my opinion, that will be all from now. No, for now.
Okay, very good. Thank you very much. Gracias, Jose. Let's move on to Ivailo Kalfin, Director of European Foundation for the Improvement of Living and Working Conditions at Eurofound, right? And you did a study finding that link between the presence of a right to disconnect policy at a company level and improved work-life balance, and there is evidence of that, isn't there, Ivailo?
Oh yes, Chris. There is definitely evidence that the right to disconnect is a policy which is of interest, of course, to the workers, but also to the employers. So everybody who is involved in the world of work has the interest to have this regulated. And I'll present some data from our latest survey. Actually, we are researching on that since quite a lot of years, still before COVID. I mean, we were working on telework. The latest one was focused on companies that do have or don't have right to disconnect, how at company level this problem is addressed. And we made case studies in several countries. I mean, actually in 4 countries, in France, Germany, Belgium, and Italy, where there is legislation and where there is a practice of the companies. And I would say that the evidence is absolutely clear of this research. But before going to that, I mean, the right to disconnect is practically part of the concept of the working time. I mean, if you don't have the right to disconnect from work, then you have 24/7 working time. I mean, that means that you have to be all the time focused and ready to start the work. I don't know if Jose, a taxi driver sitting on in the cab on the street, is at work. I think he's at work. As well as somebody sitting on his desk and thinking about his forthcoming holidays, who is also at work, but not productive, maybe in this particular moment. So in order to be productive, you need to have people relaxed, focused, recovering in between the working hours. And this is the point where it's really very much in the interest of everybody, including both the workers and the employers, do have the interest to have performing workers and performing labor force. When COVID, I mean, the right to disconnect is not only linked to telework. That's for any type of work. Even if you are not teleworking, you need to have the right to disconnect. But with the telework, the need to discuss these issues increased further. Because with the telework, the way of communicating between managers and workers changed very much. I mean, you don't see the worker physically sometimes. He's working from a distance, he's working from home. The fact that the manager doesn't see the worker doesn't mean that the worker is not working. or doesn't mean that the worker is available at any time when the manager in the middle of the night decides that there is something very important for that. So we have to accept that. I mean, this is a new development with the massive use of teleworking after COVID, and we have to live with that, and we have to adapt to that. So the visibility of the worker is not linked to the working time. So the worker might work and is working much more than actually is visible by the managers. And this is where the right to disconnect is even more important, because I mean, if you're working in the office, normally when you close the laptop, go home, the manager would say, okay, I mean, people are recovering, they're at home, they're with the family. But when they don't see you, they never know whether you are available, whether you are with the family, whether you have to take kids from the school or to go to the hospital or something like that. So I'll go to some hard data that we have from this last survey, and I would like to ask Yes to move the slides. As you see, in total, we have 80% of the workers being addressed by the managers during the time which is supposed to be a rest.
Does that show that the law is not working?
That's yes, 80% of the people experience that somebody is addressing them. By the way, not only the managers. I mean, in most of the cases, these are colleagues, these are customers, these are partners, these are managers. I mean, you have your mobile phone available or your email address available, and anybody can address you at any time. The result is 80% of the workers are addressed outside of the working hours. Next slide, please. What happens if we have right to disconnect policy? So this is the blue columns. When you have the right to disconnect policy, you still sometimes, as Jose said, you work overtime. But first, you work overtime when you have agreed before with your manager that your work might include eventually overtime. And you do not work overtime more to complete your regular tasks. So you can be much more, you can organize your time much better and predict how exactly you organize the time. You know that today, for example, I'm going to work 1 hour more, maybe tomorrow I'm going to take it off. But this is something that you decide and you organize yourself. While in the cases that we don't have a right to disconnect, very often, I mean, look also at the last column, the manager or the client is addressing you, and you have to react, and you have to be there. So the right to disconnect allows the workers and the managers also to have a much better organized working time and predictable working time, so that if we speak about the work-life balance and the care for family members, for children, for example, etc., this is definitely a much better option. On this slide, you see the perception of the people working with right to disconnect or without right to disconnect. So this is the workers' experience, in particular with telework. As you see, telework is accepted positively. I mean, that's not of a surprise. It happens in all the research that we are making. It allows much better organization of time, work-life balance, etc., etc. Unfortunately, this refers only to 20% of the workers. 80% of the workers are not working remotely. And that increases the gap between teleworkable and non-teleworkable jobs. But when you speak about satisfaction from the job, it's clearly the positive satisfaction, the very positive and some positive satisfaction is much higher when you have the right to disconnect. So the workers feel much better in terms of time organization, autonomy, work-life balance, etc., if they have the rules. And if these rules, of course, are applied. If they have in the company, again, this is a research from companies with experience of real people with the companies, and it's very clear that the right to disconnect policy, the existence of this policy, increases the satisfaction of the workers there. Next slide, please. something which is very important, again, both for the workers and for the employers. You have much less health problems if people have right to disconnect policy. And again, you see that here, the yellow line is when you don't have a right to disconnect, and the blue line is where you have a right to disconnect. When you go to all these eventually health problems, starting from change in appetite, muscular pains, restlessness, digestive problems, irritability, insomnia, etc., anxieties, backache, overall fatigue. For all these parameters, people working without right to disconnect policy feel less health effects.
I think the one where it does exceed is change in appetite. I guess it's change for the better. They eat better, or
I don't want to share my personal experience. When you are close to the fridge, sometimes
exactly.
there is a change. But in general, there is a very clear health effect with that, which means less sick leaves. Which is also very much appreciated by the employers. I mean, because this is in many cases a problem. And next one, please. Also, the right to disconnect helps the flexible working time and the meeting of the workers' need. You see that. When it comes to accommodating childcare and home, including schooling, etc., accommodate caring responsibilities, people that do have a right to disconnect in their companies are much more able to combine these domestic tasks with their work. And this is not the case when they don't have the right to disconnect. So next one, please. The decreasing overtime work. Again, this is also another result that we have from the study. You have different methods here how the overtime could be decreased, and they are applied in different companies. I mean, in the companies that we considered and we researched. Whatever measures you are making to decrease the overtime work, if you have a policy in place for right to disconnect, these measures are much more efficient. So if it is a concern, and it is a concern in a number of companies, the overtime, all the measures that are applied work better if they are supported with the right to disconnect policy at company level. These are the results. Here you have, and this short presentation is going to be available. You have the link to the study. It's extremely interesting. And again, I say in conclusion, this is very clearly showing that if you have a right to disconnect policy in your company, then the effects, positive effects, both for the workers and the employers are much higher. Thank you.
Can we back up to that last slide? Can you guys move back? The biggest décalage, you would say in French, is the one there in the middle, restricting access to company emails, messaging during specific hours. That shows a marked difference, doesn't it? That's really interesting. That's quite telling.
Yeah, these are different measures that at company level are taken in order to fight the overwork, the overtime, etc., that then needs to be compensated. And yes, indeed. I mean, if you cut internet, then you are disconnected.
Yeah, that's really key. Okay, let's throw this out to you, the audience. We go to Q&A now for a little while. Does anybody have anything to add or ask about? And Jose, you wanted to add something there? Okay, yeah, please, and then we'll go to you. Yes.
Thank you very much. Sorry about that because I forgot two important points in my intervention before. First of all is that for us, I think this specific issue is a matter of social dialogue more than any other thing, probably. Because as we were commenting before, it is very difficult to measure, very difficult to enforce. So it has to be developed through the goodwill of the parts. No, if two parts agrees on do something in the most productive way, this is much better than any other measure or any other mean to enforce and restrict and punish and things like that. No, this is the reason why in Spain we are very happy to announce that last year employers and trade unions reach quite a comprehensive collective bargaining agreement, which have a whole chapter, Chapter 11, regarding and imparting directives downstream to the collective bargaining around this right to disconnect. The second point, very important, we have had around the definition of this directive, and before the definition of this directive, we have had some of the very rare examples of successful social dialogue process around a right to disconnect. And this was the agreement reached by the public trade union and the employers of the public sector, exactly developing the right to disconnect in the fourth point from the Articles 11 to 13. No? There were very interesting contributions on how to implement the right to disconnect in the public administration. I am not in the position to advise the Commission, but I would advise the Commission that perhaps using or impulsing yourself in these elements of agreement that provides a very good ground to actually do something that really works. No? And I think that impulse that could be a very interesting experience on the matter. Thank you very much, Chris.
Gracias. Gracias, Jose. Good points to make. And Alex, you have another point to make before we go out to...
Just a very small point why we need the right to disconnect, and also citing Eurofound numbers. Because for me, this is terrifying. Having an issue that 80% of the workers who are surveyed there are saying that they are receiving work-related communication outside their working time is already bad in itself. But, if you look at the numbers, we have more serious issues. Because out of those 80%, 75% are saying that they are continuing to work outside working time because it is expected out of them. Yeah. And 61% are saying that they are doing so out of fear of negative impact if no response is provided. Yeah, so, citing only these three figures, I think we can stop there today and ultimately have the best argumentation in our hands to push the Commission to act as soon as possible. We cannot wait another 6 months to finish this legislature, to wait for a new Commission, to wait for the new committees to be set up in the European Parliament later on this year, because we will be missing another year. We have already missed. And EPP, even during the plenary, said it's a pity. Some of their members also said it's a pity that we missed 2.5 years. Ultimately, this was something that we really fought hard against during the negotiations on the report on the right to disconnect. So even those who were really opposing and saying that we should wait for the 3 years of social dialogue at EU level are saying that we have missed the opportunity to act earlier on. But seeing these numbers, it is of utmost importance that the Commission acts as soon as possible, because it is useless to have a patchwork of legislation, a patchwork of initiatives in a number of member states. Because even where we have legislation, our workers are not feeling themselves protected. They don't have the reversal of burden of proof when it comes to fighting against discrimination when they use their right to disconnect. It is still not there. They are not feeling safe, ultimately, to go out there and say, I am being protected by a strong right to disconnect. And therefore, this is the beauty of European legislation. This is the beauty of the European Union, to have one piece of legislation applicable in the same way, in the correct social model in each and every member state. Therefore, the numbers are there, the data is there. It is frightening to see the health impacts when we don't have the right to disconnect, but having these numbers whereby workers are being coerced, feel that they have to continue to work even when they are protected by legislation in their member states, I think it's a very clear sign that we should act and not waste more time.
Good point, Alex. Very good. Yeah, absolutely. Let's try to get some Vox Pop out here. Please, question? You give your name first, please.
Yes, good morning, and thank you very much for the good presentations. My name is Naila Glez, and I represent Eurocadre, which is the Council of Professionals and Managers. So we represent 6 million of managers in Europe. And I have just one remark, especially at what Mr. Rosello said about the difficulties to have a right to disconnect for people with responsibilities, and these are our members. And we know that these are the people who need the most the right to disconnect. 4 over 5 managers are complaining from having work-related stress in Europe, and 60% of female managers have sleeping problems because of their work and the always unconnected culture. So definitely what we need is a right to disconnect for these people, because also 80% of the workers, as Eurofound said, are addressed by their managers outside working hours, which means that managers should show the example. And for that, they should have also their right to disconnect and should be able to use this right. And what I want to say here is that the problem also that we are having in our companies is that we always promote this always connected culture. And you can see the evaluation criteria, the promotion criteria. You always need to be connected all the time to be able to have your promotion or to be well evaluated. And by the way, this is like a problem also of when we can see the glass ceiling, because we can have, in many countries, women are always taking care of the children and they cannot always be connected. So, of course, the repercussion of the stress of the managers can be, we can feel this repercussion to the workers as well. So which means that the company has to start working from the top management on this issue. Thank you very much.
Yeah, good point, that it goes all the way, almost all the way to the top, doesn't it?
Yeah.
Agnes?
Yeah, I think you're completely right, and I think it's it has grown gradually, but going into a much higher tempo all of the time, and it's also leading to let's say people who are saying I'm not perfect because I cannot reach this on all of the time. So people are also, if you're not able to be online all of the time, or you're facing difficulties with that, it seems to be as if you are yourself to blame. So it is in a way the numbers Alex has mentioned are clear already, but I really think we have to save ourselves from this rat race. And I think it's up to, let's say, I can declare myself the older generation. I think the older generation also have to take care of young people not falling into a trap and being burnout around your 30s, because, of course, having mental problems is not... Okay, it can happen, but it more often than not is leading to I'm to blame, I'm not good enough, I'm not keeping up the pace. And I think that's a pity, because in a way you should also be able to reach the top without always being connected. And perhaps just one example. Yeah. I think because you mentioned the gender dimension. I think for men in top position, it's quite normal that you do like 3-4 side jobs to combine this with your main job, because then you can say, I'm really up to it. And if that is also a way of disconnecting from your main job. So those who say you can only be in a leadership position, if you are working 7 days a week for 24 hours a day, it's nonsense. And we should not, we women, should not let us push in that, be pushed in that corner.
Well, any other questions, comments out there? Anybody? Yes, please.
Thank you. Marianne Wind from European Parliament. Thank you for having this debate today. It's very, very, very important. I think I was so glad, Mr. Calvin, when I saw your slides, because you have clients in it. And client is something we don't speak a lot about. Only a few weeks ago, I visited the trade union for electricians. And they asked me about this directive, right to disconnect. And I was right to disconnect, it's an office problem. But no, they could tell me the story about electricians in large companies where they in evenings and weekends have somebody on call to have the duty this weekend. But the company, supermarket, bank, whatever, have the number on their own normal house electricians. So they don't call the guy on duty for the weekend. They call their own normal electricians. It's not a problem if it's rarely they call. But sometimes it's going crazy. They are on call 24/7. They don't have time home. No problem with the payments. Everything is good, very good overtime payment, but payment isn't enough. You can't have a weekend when you always think, maybe they call, I can't go to whatever because I had to be home if they call me.
And you're not getting paid for being on call, or
Nope.
are you?
Nope.
No.
Not for
there's
that part.
There's a key there,
Only
too. Right.
when you are getting
Yeah.
the call. And in the same time, right now I'm negotiating the talent pool so we can get workers from third countries because we have a lack of workers specialists in Europe. And why are we treating our workers so badly in the companies so they are going to get sick and maybe get out of the labor market and we have to import? It's crazy. It's really crazy. We have a sick culture.
So, Maya, can I ask you a question? Because I understand that a lot of Danish employers are standing in the way of this. How do you overcome that resistance? I think that's what needs to be fixed, right? Because there's across the board there's support, even as we mentioned, even within the center right EPP. How can we overcome that bit of resistance? And a lot of employers are supporting this. We'll hear that from Valeria. How do we fix this?
I'm not sure it's manner in Denmark, but I can see the developing of this. It's getting bigger every day. I think the first thing is that we are going to talk about it because a culture is coming very slowly, and you don't say no the first time or second time and 10th time, but if we don't talk about it, we can't find solutions if we don't talk about it. So the first step is to talk about it, and we're doing that today. And I think it will get into the collective agreement sometimes in Denmark. We have collective agreements at the private labor market next year. So I think it will. I think it will be a part of the agenda there.
Any other questions out there? Yes, Valeria Ronzetti with the employers.
Just to react on that and make it clear that our members were absolutely not against to speak about it, and it was quite of a shock, the position of the Danish private employers, because it came very late in the negotiation. So as we are speaking a lot about collective bargaining, I of course can't preempt what my members will do, but maybe it will be the way through. So that part of the economy will be covered through collective bargaining led by public services employers and trade union, and the other not yet.
Well, maybe we're going to also hear from Jan about maybe the public employees showing that it's working among them might encourage the private sector. Esther, can I go to Esther? Maybe you more have some to add on this, but I mean, you were involved in the negotiations, right? And you will be. How do we fix this? How do we overcome that bit of resistance among the business, the employers?
So let me be very clear. There is no opportunity for the two employer organisations who rejected continuing with the negotiations to come back to the table and to begin to negotiate. That is impossible. Unless somebody from Business Europe wants to say something different, it's impossible. Right? The employers said to us there was nothing they could agree among themselves that they could ask us. So it wasn't that we were asked something, we refused it. They left. So it takes two to tango. If somebody walks off the dance floor, you're left on your own. And Alex is right. There's no more time to waste because this problem isn't going to get better, it's going to get worse. So the reason I'm here is a very, very clear message. Workers and their trade unions throughout Europe are asking for an EU directive. We're also asking for support for the sector agreements to be put forward as well. So very, very clear message. We need an overarching framework directive to deal with this problem. What we're going to be doing in Val d'Uchaise today is beginning a discussion about how do we make sure in future, if we open a negotiation on a topic, it doesn't become a negative and a delay in the system, but rather it still remains as a strength and an important pillar and plank of European democracy. And that needs a lot more resources and thinking. And we're going to spend the year discussing that in a very robust way so that this time next year, when we're celebrating the directive, we'll also be back here in confidence to be able to report to this Parliament, because it's not nothing that the social partners said to the European Parliament, stop your democracy because the other part of the democratic system wants to try and negotiate it. That's not nothing. And we did that, and we tried. Negotiations sometimes fail. That's true. But we have to take stock of why it failed and how we can, if we open up a negotiation again between the social partners, be confident that it wouldn't end the same way. Because I'll be very quick on this. Because 25 years ago, the exact same thing happened with the agency work directive. The trade unions and the employers tried to negotiate that. It failed. It came back to the Parliament, and then the other system took it up. The second time we tried, which was on telework and the right to disconnect, that also was unable to come to a conclusion. So before we were to open up a third time, we want to know how we could be ensured that it wouldn't just become a tactic. I'm not accusing anybody of a tactic, but there is a risk if you have a system that can be used as a tactic to delay legislation, that some people might do that. So we have to make absolutely sure that that tactic isn't available to anybody.
Are there any other questions, comments out there? We've got about 5 minutes left during this panel. One question that comes to mind, let me come back to Esther, and then we'll go to Jose, is in the fact that what's happening at Val d'Uchaise today, and having the signature of Madame von der Leyen on that, doesn't that add a bit of oomph to what we want to accomplish with right to disconnect?
Yeah, so without telling tales at school, the right to disconnect isn't within the declaration,
It's
but,
not, no.
quality jobs is.
Yeah.
A commitment to quality jobs, especially within the context of labour shortages and the future of Europe. There's also a commitment to the European Pillar of Social Rights and the full implementation of the European Pillar of Social Rights. But I'm not allowed. I'll be getting deep trouble if I start like making. But quality jobs is. But also, as I said, the new structures. So there will be an envoy agreed. So the role of the Commission in supporting and challenging where social dialogue isn't happening at national level, because it's not just Ursula von der Leyen who's signing, it's also the Belgian presidency on behalf of all the member states. So the discussion that we were having, quite rightly, because there is the other part to this, which is that we do need to have at national level the transposition of the directive. And that needs to include the social partners in that transposition. But also the modalities of how you make it work will be different in different sectors. But we need an overarching directive guaranteeing the right, the obligation on employers not to contact, the right of workers to be able to disconnect, the protection from discrimination and, we say, actions against you if you are to do that. All of that needs to be clearly set out in the directive. But the modality of how you can do it absolutely needs to be done through collective bargaining with bona fide trade unions. And that also needs to be in the directive. That, we say, ability for collective agreements to be able to achieve the objective needs to be part of the directive.
Okay, a couple of minutes left. Jose, I guess that idea about maybe where the public sector maybe can help to set the tone for the private sector and showing that it works, what do you think?
That's actually a very good question. There is a permanent tension between the working condition in the private sector and working condition in the public sector. A permanent tension. Because, well, things like usually it's easier to enforce a determined working condition in the public sector than in the private sector. Because private sector, to start, is bigger and much more diverse. Being that state, I think all good experience can be used as an example. For example, in Spain, we are thinking about cutting work-day time in the next legislative period by an hour, approximately. This is not generalized right now, but many people in the public sector has actually currently the working day time that we want to extend to the rest of the people. Having now actually working a shorter work day help us to push the agreement and to push the initiative, because many people can say, if you cut the work day, you will kill the economy, blah, 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 blah. No, there is actually working and it's working fine. So is it public sector agreements or public sector condition useful to exert as an example? Definitively, yes, yes, it could help.
Okay. Yeah, just very quickly, Ivailo, if there's maybe a final word to me. I think isn't there maybe a division between digital and other kinds of work that maybe if we can show that it works on the digital side, we can make it work elsewhere? Is that possible? Have you seen in your studies on that?
Yes, there is a difference because when you have telework, again, because it's less visible physically,
Yeah.
I mean, then the working time, the visibility of the worker performing the tasks there is lower. So, like the electrician in Denmark or somebody else, I mean, having your mobile can call you 24/7. I need you, because you don't have to see this person sitting in the office or his desk, etc., etc. So this is increasing. But the whole thing, and this is just a sentence, the whole thing has to be considered through the prism of the change in the world of work and the working modes at all. Because with teleworking, with more flexible working time, in some countries we have these experiments with decreasing working time. This is not decreased because of some, I don't know, other ideas, but this is because it is supposed to increase the productivity of the worker. So the idea of decreasing the working time is if you increase the productivity and if you improve the work-life balance. So now this discussion is part of the working time. So if we think that the working time is important, then part of it has to be what is not working time. And we have to focus more and more, I think, on this particular time to recover, to rest, and to prepare for the next day of service. Because now the boundaries are blurred with teleworking on that.
Ivailo, thank you very much, and a round of applause for all our speakers. For the first panel, thank you very much. Muchas gracias. Thank you well. And if we can move to the next panel, that would be great. I might mention Marianne, who you just spoke, You were a rapporteur on an own initiative report, in other words, the Parliament making its own report on occupational health and safety framework, is that right? And also on you negotiated on mental health and the right to disconnect. So you were involved in those negotiations, right? Yeah, yeah. So hope you can hear us at this point. Hugues again. Hugues, welcome. The legal advisor to the Department of Social Politics and Well-Being at Work, trade union ABBV FGTB of Belgium. So that will be, that's quite an alphabet soup, isn't it? But basically, to see how things are working in Belgium where there is a right to disconnect law. And I do hope that we will see the Commissioner Nicola Schmit. It's a very busy day, of course, but very important to hear from him on what the state of affairs is in trying to get this jump-started, a right to disconnect legislation for the EU 27. Let us begin, and also please get your questions and comments ready because we want to get you involved as well, very important. And please tweet right to disconnect. That's easy, isn't it? Hashtag right to disconnect, if you hear a good sound bite. Jan Willem Goudrian at EPSU. I like the flyer you had, that the time has come for the Commission to dispel uncertainties and take action. You have a right to disconnect agreement with employers in the public sector, right? How is that working?
Thank you. Before I answer that question, Chris, just to say I have to rush out of the debate at about 12:20,
Okay.
because I have to go to Val d'Uchaise as well, and I don't have a private driver, so I have to find another way of transport. The answer is to your question, it's not working because it has not been implemented. We reached an agreement with the employers, and I'll tell you a little bit more about it. So we reached an agreement with the European employers in central government administrations, if you want, people who work for ministries, in 22, and we have asked the European Commission, so Commissioner Schmit, to implement this as a legally binding instrument through a directive. And because of the failure of the cross-sectoral negotiations, of course, this is now on the table again. And I will address a bit of context, Chris, if you allow me, and then the contents as is the subject of our panel. So the employers for central government administrations, that's called EUPA, and the trade unions have been discussing digitalization, telework for public administrations For a number of years, we have a guide which says what should be included in an agreement which you negotiate at national sectoral level and what is expected. A guide from 2020, but we quickly discovered, and a bit for the same reasons as Mr. Saliba mentioned earlier, that there was actually a need for European action. And in 2021, we started to negotiate on an agreement to become a directive. These negotiations were finished in January 22. We got the support of the unions and the employers, an employers group of 19 employers, observers and members of the employers organization in June, and then we signed it in October 22 and sent it to the Commission. This group represents about 9 million workers in Europe. But then the cross-sectoral negotiations intervened. The Commission told us, well, you have to wait. We are going to wait to see what happens at the cross-sectoral level. And we know what happened because these negotiations failed. And I want to repeat what I think was mentioned by the members of parliament, but also by Esther. It's not because there are a number of employers, a small group of employers in one of the employer organizations who walk away from these negotiations that there's no need to act. I mean, it's not a veto of those employers on the need for the Commission to act. So our agreement is on the table. It's even more relevant because the European Commission in October, November last year came with this big idea of a European administrative space, enhancing the European administrative space, which is all about digitalization, connecting, making public administrations more efficient, more effective, etc. And it is, of course, about the staff in public administrations working with digital technologies. We also claim that it is linked with good public administration, one of the pillars of the social development, one of the social development goals, and actually also recognized in the European Charter. So we were very pleased with the debate here in Parliament, in this House, where the Commissioner was also present, where the members of Parliament reiterated their demand for legislation, reiterated their demand for action, something also the Commissioner said he would do. And I hope he will confirm that later on. And in that debate, there was also reference to our agreement. So what is in this agreement? A couple of points. I will not go into too much detail, so we have more time for debate. First of all, we address telework and ensure that there are equal rights for workers doing telework and workers who are not doing telework. And these rights also include information consultation rights. Workers also have the right to disconnect in this agreement, which is a voluntary and reversible right. It's not because one time you say you want to do telework that you always have to do telework. It must be agreed with the trade unions at all the relevant levels. I think Mr. Rosello earlier stressed also the importance of working with the unions, collective bargaining. And it supports and it encourages the national social partners also to address the additional expenditure which is necessary to do your work at home. It addresses violence at work, maybe a point which is not so often raised. We all know that this is a priority. 1 in every 5 employees face violence at work, according to the recent ILO study. And I also know this House, the Socialists and Democrats, have also been very concerned about domestic violence, something which is addressed in this agreement. And we have a provision on how to deal with the workplace dimension of domestic violence. There's an important chapter on health and safety, and I was very appreciative of several comments earlier which link the need for regulating telework, regulating the right to disconnect with the mental health pandemic and the mental health strategy, if you want. Yesterday there was a conference of the of the Belgian presidency on mental health, and the Vice Prime Minister of Belgium, Mrs. De Sutter, stressed very much this particular part in our agreement in that conference. And Mrs. de Sutter is one of the employers who signed our agreement and has called upon the Commissioner to act now. There are other parts in the agreements which I'm not going to address in any detail, just to mention. There's also a reference to artificial intelligence at the place of work, possibly one of the first where employers and unions at European level try to come to terms with this, stressing the human in command, the human controlled approach. There's issues around data management, data privacy, of course, skills, training, qualifications. Not unimportant for us as trade unions, and we were very pleased that the employers agreed. Also something on the outsourcing of digitalization and data management, which happens more and more in public services. Don't open my mouth. It's another discussion, so I don't go into that. So to summarize and to conclude, we think there is a need to act. There is an agreement which the Commission is asked to act upon, which we are expecting an answer on, and it is not because others cannot come to terms that the employers in public administration and the unions in public administration couldn't. We did, and we ask now for legislation to implement the right to disconnect and telework, at least for those 9 million workers.
Thank you, Jan. How much do you think, I mean, you're going to this de Val-Duchesse for this summit. How much do you think that could maybe add with those signatures on that paper, some kind of momentum or regenerate momentum for this kind of legislation?
We expect it will do. I mean, as I think Esther explained, and others will maybe add, Valeria will maybe add, in the Val-Duchesse declaration, we are committed with the trade unions, with the employers, to discuss those sort of issues. How do we deal with this? Esther already mentioned that earlier in the debate. So, yes, it will add. But we now have a directive or a request for a directive on the table. There's now a time to act, and we don't have to wait for that process, which will also cover other things, to implement something. I mean, the one thing which should not happen is that the Val-Duchesse declaration is used as an excuse to delay and delay and delay, and then there will be another excuse. I mean, I think that should be unacceptable to the S&D, but also to the other parties here in Parliament. There is a need to act.
Okay, thank you, Jan. Let us move on online to Spain and talk to Jose Varela Ferrio, responsible for digitalization at the UGT Spanish Trade Union. Jose, can you hear me?
Yes.
Buenos días, mucho gusto. We talked to already to Jose Domingo Rossello with the Prime Minister's office here, and well, I would like to get your take on this idea about how maybe collective agreements can help to make this happen on a case-by-case basis. How is it working that with this legislation that you do have in Spain? How is that working?
Bueno, lo siento, pero necesito hablar en castellano, en español. Muchísimas gracias por la invitación. Tengo muchísimo tiempo y sí, yo efectivamente quería comentaros cómo se está realizando
The connection is substandard. It's not suitable for interpretation, unfortunately.
Derecho digital. Next slide, please. Bueno, creo que lo primero que tenemos que entender para realizar una directiva es lo que está pasando en nuestra sociedad. Hoy, 9 de cada 10 personas en España, y con idénticas cifras en toda Europa, llevan la oficina en su bolsillo, en su pantalón, en su chaqueta, en su blusa. Todos podemos hacer prácticamente todas las tareas relacionadas con nuestro trabajo, y más si es un trabajo de cuello azul, en nuestro móvil.
Jose, José.
Yes.
Sí,
Sí.
otro José.
Sí, dime.
Podemos hablar con usted un poco más tarde porque no tenemos la interpretación en español, ¿ok?
No hay problema. Espero.
Ok. So, momentito. Y vamos a regresar a usted, ¿ok? All right. So now, sorry about that. Technically, we'll work this out. There's always the unpredictable. Valeria Ronciti. Buongiorno, Valeria. General Secretary of SGI, Europe Employers and Providers of Services of General Interest. Now, your organization supports this idea. That's why you're here. But there are others in the business world that don't want this. How can we fix this? How can we win over everybody in the business community to support this during this term of the parliament?
So I can't make miracles, and I can only tell you what is our advice, what are the good points in the agreement that I think can be used and the Commission should use in a proposal for a directive. And I have to be very honest about the fact that it's not that my membership was, yes, we are going to negotiate and have a directive over the right to disconnect. Simply, we have a very pragmatic approach saying, we know this will happen, and we think that the negotiations are the best way for this to happen. We prefer to negotiate a framework agreement at European level instead of having a directive where we have no say. So that's the level of frustration my members have, because they have been exactly trying for 1 year, more than 1 year, to shape the text in the best way possible for their workplaces.
Can I interject? Because what I read in the background on this is that over at Business Europe, there was a willingness to agree to this on the digital side. Is that right? That digital was okay, but the other sectors were not. The other kinds of.
I'm looking at my colleague who negotiated for over 1 year, and okay, am I allowed to give insight about? Okay. So, he's the negotiator, so he's the most sensitive. There is a big level of frustration in all those who negotiated. And there were different, there was one part who didn't want the right to disconnect, another part that didn't want telework. So at the end of the day, it was an impossible situation. And this is due to the fact, if I want to make the link to Val d'Uchesse, that I'm afraid we lost the habit to negotiate properly. Negotiate means compromise. Since the start, you go to the negotiating table with your own mandate, but you know that you have to compromise. And so it is impossible at a certain moment to pick and choose which part of the agreement you would be ready to sign in and which is not possible for you to sign in. Is a package. So that's what we are trying to fix. I hope we will fix in Val d'Uchesse to, get back to the good rules of negotiating.
Because collective agreements by sector already indicates flexibility, doesn't it? From the union side, from the labor side.
On both sides, and that's why that's the feature, and as I referred to it, I think this feature should be preserved by a future proposal, which is the proposal is a framework that leaves a lot of room for maneuver for national company, national and sectoral collective bargaining to fix the details. You can't go into details in a framework agreement or a directive drafted by the Commission. It's virtually impossible. There are too many details that only the workplace level can fix because the sectors are very different. In our case, 24/7 services function very differently than others. And that's why also another thing that we would like to preserve in the proposal is the very difficult achievement and compromise we reach when it comes to the working time directive. That was clearly the elephant in the room when speaking about the right to disconnect. Right.
Commissioner Nicolas Schmidt. Welcome. So how much hope do you have then that we can get this started again before the elections?
The hope is here. I mean, it's only Nicolas who can. I mean, Nicolas has the duty now to take it over, and my point earlier, Nicolas, was that I mean, you will not get the urgency feeling from our membership. I have to be frank on this, but what we can surely say is that it would be a pity to waste the good points we scored in the text, and that these points could be an inspiration for Nicolas to draft the text.
Okay, and Nicolas, if you're able to wait for one more speaker, that would be great, because
not all the time.
not all the time. That's the thing, exactly. But I think it's important that you hear from the different voices a bit before you comment. And let's go to Belgium, where there is a law on right to disconnect. And let's talk to Eugen, of legal advisor at ABBV BFGTB, the trade union organization. And what I see here is that more than 50% of the teleworkers in Belgium report having to do des heures supplémentaires, extra work hours. And more than 60% have more pressure since COVID. That's quite telling that even though you have that law that's been in place for what, a couple of years now? Just this year. Oh, okay. Well, all right. Then tell us, how are things working now on the ground? Is there any progress?
Okay, thank you for the invitation. I'm going to speak in French, so I hope the interpretation is going to work this time. But I will switch. Donc, je vais
So I'm going to talk about two different times in Belgium, because we've had this law since 2018, right, disconnect law. It was amended in 2022. So in 2018 already there was a provision for collective agreement at enterprise level, but there was no obligation for this collective negotiation in the firm leading to an agreement with the employer for right to disconnection in the enterprise. And following COVID and the pandemic and all the resulting stress and pressure on workers, the minister came up with a law in October 2022 for a mandatory right to disconnect in companies with more than 20 employees. So now those with more than 20 employees have to have a collective negotiation in the enterprise or in the sector to work at the modalities for disconnection and to establish a proper work-life balance and take into account the risks of permanent connection. So that ties in what has been said here about implementation through collective bargaining, because we see that before 2023 now, when it wasn't mandatory, there was almost no employer who implemented this. So now that there's an obligation, we see a culture of disconnection in businesses, and that has effects. We're beginning to see evaluations and so on, because employers now have to define at least three things in their policies. One's the practical modalities. What can an employee do or not do in the firm? Secondly, training for all employees and management personnel. That ties in what Raquette said about all their workers right up to the very top. And thirdly, it's instructions in regard to the use of digital tools, the most appropriate use of digital tools. So I think that this Belgian experiment could be beneficial in terms of the demand for European directive on disconnection. And what hasn't been said yet is that in the scope of the directive, because in Belgium the main problem was that it was limited to enterprises with more than 20 employees. Whereas we know that in Belgium and Europe, most of the industrial fabrics made up of smaller, very small, or smaller, very small firms. So it doesn't apply there. So all workers should be included regardless of their function or jobs. And you should include all companies, be it or all employers, be it public or private sector. And as I said already, one should promote social dialogue in order to implement the modalities of disconnection. So not just a directive that tells people what to do, but also some rules hammered out between the social partners to develop the right to disconnection at company or sectoral level, depending on the level which is negotiated. The moderators, we talk about a culture of a right to disconnect, but are there elements of evidence that has changed things? Even anecdotal, is there any evidence, even anecdotal evidence? Do you have collective agreements that show that progress has been made? Yes, we're in the process of looking at the sectoral agreements that have been made since April 2023, from which date things were mandatory. We're analysing these at the moment. There's a lot of good practice already in place. In a fair few collective agreements, it's stipulated that workers cannot suffer any prejudice for having exercised the right to disconnection, for having not replied to an email, not having picked up the phone, not having switched off at the weekend. So that's written into the collective agreements. You can't suffer any detriment for availing yourself of your right. Now, there's a lot of other things that need to be implemented, but that's one of the things that where we're already seeing a beneficial effect.
Schmidt, we've heard about Belgium, at least a change of culture, a change in the dialogue. And from Spain, we've heard also that there is also there's a change there, but it's not very marked yet. It's taking time to seep in and really make changes in the way people work and having the right to disconnect. And of course, the crux of this discussion here is whether we can get this thing started again and get this legislation passed before the elections. Is that possible?
So, good morning. Thank you for inviting me. If you allow me, yesterday we had a very interesting conference organized by the Belgian presidency on mental health at work. And it is very clear that mental problems are increasing. And when we look what are the reasons, what are the causes, it's obvious it's the intensification or intensity of work. New technologies are not just making work easier, they are creating a different kind of pressure. And this will not change, maybe, because now with artificial intelligence, the whole organization, or at least in many sectors, the whole organization of work will change, the surveillance of workers will change, the control will change, and so on and so forth. So, and this brings now the right to disconnect to a new level, because it's clear that if we want to avoid that more and more people will suffer from burnouts, stress, with all the other medical consequences, health consequences, really we have to impose this culture of the right to disconnect. Now, I always say an intelligent company, there must be a few, an intelligent company, they have understood that if they are not practicing the right to disconnect, well, they will have other kinds of problems, like mental health issues, stresses, absenteeism, and so on and so forth. And also people saying, no, I do not want just to work under this condition, I look somewhere else. As we are now in a bit different kind of labor market, this is a new pressure also for companies. So it's in that sense, it's a good moment to really go forward with this right to disconnect. That's the general one. Now, I must say I'm very disappointed by the fact that it was not possible to have an agreement between unions and employers on this specific issue, which I must say was launched by the Parliament, and Alex, who is here, I was told that it's your birthday, so it's the right moment to have this conference on your birthday. So I think this is now, well, we have to live with that it was not possible. Nevertheless, as you asked me, we have the Val Duchesse meeting.
Yeah, and you'll be there.
Yes, not alone. There is another person here who will be there. And this is a bit also the consequence of this failure. And, well, it has to show now that either people take social dialogue serious or just it's for the, in French you would say pour la galerie. No, but then we are in a problem. We have a problem. Now, what happens now? I give you my view, my personal view, because commissioners can have also a personal view, I think. My personal view would have been, okay, there has been a long negotiation which has taken place. There has been not an agreement on the tax, but something like close to an agreement on the text. Now we take this text and we try to accelerate the procedure on this text and take it over as a commission. That would be, I say it very clear, my preferred option. Unfortunately, I'm one commissioner out of 27. I'm not a president, so maybe that could change, but for the time being, I'm not the president. So it's clear that that view was not shared. So now we start from the beginning. And I'm pushing very hard now to start the beginning as soon as possible. So we will then start with consultation of social partners as if nothing had happened before. I say it because for me it's a bit strange. You consult social partners on an issue they have worked for 2 years on. I say it. This is for me, okay, I accept that this has not been the option, but I'm a bit really, how should I say, surprised. But okay, that's the fact then. We start now with the consultation process of social partners soon. Soon means in the coming weeks. Okay. And then the whole process is continuing. We will see how this will go. First consultation, second consultation, and so on and so forth. Well, the point is, the positive point, let's be a bit positive, is the issue of the right to disconnect remains on our agenda, on the Commission's agenda, and at the end, normally, we will have a directive on the right to disconnect. When? More difficult to say. Under this mandate, probably not. Certainly not under the mandate of this Parliament. So it remains on the agenda. We will start the process, but it will take the time it normally takes for any procedure where there has been no long negotiation before. But okay, this is what the program is.
Commissioner, I mean, you will be at Val Duchesse, and others will be as well, putting their names on this declaration, including Madame von der Leyen as well. How much could that maybe add to, I mean, of course, right to disconnect is not specifically in that Val Duchesse declaration, but how much could that declaration help this?
Well, I think I know the views of some social partners, because we also have another issue, which I have to mention, which is that social partners in the public sector, I'm right to say that, more or less, central government sector, they have negotiated an agreement on the right to disconnect, and which has been approved by both sides, and which has been submitted to the Commission. And I have to say also, I've got already some letters to remind me that there has been an agreement. So this is a point which we cannot just ignore, because there has been an agreement, a sectoral one. We always said, okay, as we want to have an agreement, or an agreement covering everything. Well, we include this agreement into the overall agreement, but as the overall agreement is not taking place, and as it takes time now to come out with a general directive, so we have still to see what we will do with this particular sectoral agreement. I think we cannot, I say what I think we cannot just ignore it and say, well, now it's again 1 year or 1 year and a half before we come to the next step. So this is something which we have to discuss and which has not yet been settled. Is the Val d'Uchaise helping? I think it will not. I'm not too optimistic that now the option which has been, which is now on the table, will change.
Okay, Valeria, I think you had something to add.
It's just to say that unfortunately I'm also more and more used to be alone, thinking that the most pragmatic and simple way is the good way, and there are others around me that think differently and we go differently. But so just to encourage Nicholas not to abandon the pragmatic way, I wasn't sure yet that we were going to go for the two-stage consultation. We will answer whatever we will answer to this consultation, but this does not impede that your proposal, because we will say that we don't want to negotiate this time, can be inspired, the effective proposal, by the text that we reached. And there are a lot of good stuff there that will save a lot of months, because it's a compromise. It's a compromise by employers and workers, but it's also a kind of text that could fly, for instance, in the council or in this house, because very different views came together. So use it anyway. That's my advice.
All right, Alex, I think you wanted to say something here.
So, first of all, thanks, Commissioner Schmidt, for being with us, and I want to make this clear. Commissioner Schmidt, from the very start of this mandate, has been a great ally for the right to disconnect. He was always welcoming when it comes to our proposals, when it comes to the long, very long discussion that we had. But ultimately, I think it's a pity. It's a pity that we are in this situation, that we abided by the treaty article dealing with the consultation for social partners. We waited for more than 2.5 years for social partners to come to an agreement after we have approved a fully developed piece of legislation approved by big majorities in the plenary together and accompanied by a proposal. And ultimately, we are in a situation where now we have to kickstart again the whole process. It is a pity that ultimately we are in a situation where not Commissioner Schmidt, because he has been pushing really hard to have this as soon as possible as a proposal on the table, but to have the college ultimately who are not supporting when it comes to ultimately not lose more time, because we are in a situation where we are abusing of a treaty article which has already been extensively used, where public consultation has been used, where wide consultation with European social partners has been carried out for more than 2 years, where we ultimately were very close to agreeing on a text, where an impact assessment has already been carried out during this whole consultation. And now, when we have, as we have seen in the first panel, a presentation from Eurofound, which is showing us that even where we have legislation which has been implemented in a number of member states on the right to disconnect, which is not, in accordance to my opinion, reflective of the social model that we really keep close to our hearts, because ultimately when you have a right as fundamental as the right to disconnect, I don't believe that it should be enjoyed only by a few workers, but it should be enjoyed by each and every worker in our union. But even where we have legislation, we are falling behind. 80% of our workforce in those member states are still replying out of their working time to messages, WhatsApp messages, email messages. We have those high numbers when it comes to health-related occupational health and safety risks, from headaches to stress to eating disorders. And we are still having the College of Commissioners who are postponing, and this is just a postponement, because ultimately the European Parliament was very clear, both in the vote, in the first vote that we had more than 3 years ago, but also in the discussion that we had with Commissioner Schmidt a couple of weeks ago. And this was not an issue whereby only the S&D group is pushing forward for the right to disconnect. It's an issue where all European political groups, from left to right, are all pushing in the same direction and are all telling the European Commission, not Commissioner Schmidt, but all the European Commission, the College of Commissioners, to act because the ball is in the Commission's court. So I find it repulsing, to say the least, that we are in a situation where our Commissioner is not being supported by his colleagues to put this legislation, to put a proposal as soon as possible in this legislature to act on a problem that is causing a lot of issues. That our citizens, even in the Eurofound data, is showing that the majority, the utmost majority of our citizens, of our respondents, are saying act as soon as possible because the problem is real. It is useless to have the Working Time Directive, which is a fundamental piece of legislation when it comes to protecting the fundamental rights of our workforce, which is, I'm not going to say totally useless, but in the realities that we are living is becoming useless. With the digital realities that we are facing, it's becoming useless. So this is a strong message to the European Commission, to the College of Commissioners. Please support Commissioner Schmidt in this. There is no more time to waste.
Alex, I might mention that, in addition to Val d'Uchasse today, there is a high-level conference on mental health and work, where this is day 2 of it. And at that conference are 2 other commissioners, Mr. Skinas, who is European Way of Life, and Madame Kyriakides, who's in charge of health. And I think that shows that could be also a good basis for making this argument, right, about right to work. Yeah. It was made yesterday. It was made yesterday.
Also by the Belgian presidency. Yeah. This argument was made yesterday also by the Belgian presidency, absolutely. But, the positive, let's be positive a bit at least, is that now the issue of the right to disconnect has not disappeared. It's not saying, well, social partners did not agree, so it's the end. No, this is not the case. We will pursue, but I believe, and I say it, we could have pursued more rapidly, more efficiently. Now we start from scratch, and this means also, and that's a point I have to, this means that now the 2 parties, when they are consulted, they will not, at least not also the unions, will not consider that the base is what has been nearly agreed. Now everybody comes back to the initial position, including the unions, which I understand, because now they say really what they are committed to. So it's not anymore, I start with a negotiated compromise text. I start with what I believe should be my position. So this is clear, and the Commission then has to take that on board. At the end, we will see how and what kind of proposal will be tabled. That's clear. Having in mind also, I remind, having in mind that there is an agreement on the table which has been agreed and which we cannot just ignore.
Right. As a basic, yeah. Any questions out there? We have 15 minutes left. You got 15 minutes for us, right, Commissioner?
Yeah.
Okay.
I hope so, yeah.
Yeah, okay. Any questions out there?
Just a remark.
Okay, Jan, go ahead, please.
And then before I have to leave for Val d'Uchaise, I don't have a private driver or a commission driver. I just want to follow on from what Mr. Saliba has said earlier, that in a way the process of starting the consultation now is you always have to mind your words, but my native language is not English, so I think it's a bit ridiculous because why would employers and unions at European level start to negotiate something because they have identified there is a problem? I mean, they have seen there is a problem and it doesn't come from one moment to the other. There has been a process before this, both with the cross-sectoral social dialogue and also in our case with the sectoral social dialogue. We have been working for years with the employers on this, and we came to the conclusion a directive, at least covering public service, public administration workers, central government administration workers, is the way to go. And we would be very disappointed if the Commission would turn to us and say, well, we have to wait again, and your 9 million workers, the 9 million workers the employers and the unions represent, well, you have to wait yet again. Mind you, we already took a court case to the European Court of Justice. We magnificently lost that court case, so all the discretion is in your hands, but it doesn't, in the Commission's hands, but it doesn't mean that the Commission can just do what it wants. With that discretion comes also responsibility. So I would argue that based on the negotiations we have had, both at cross-sectoral and at sectoral level, the impact assessment, the consultation has taken place, and starting anew this process is, as I said, ridiculous. We expect action.
Okay, Commissioner, please.
Yeah, just one additional remark. We are all now organizing celebrations for Jacques Delors. That's fine. Even this evening, we have a big commemoration of Jacques Delors. But Jacques Delors is the inventor of Article 155, which is the basis for the negotiation we had on this particular issue. And he wanted this to be part of the treaty as one other way to adopt European legislation prepared, negotiated by social partners. This is really I would say, the real summum of social dialogue, coming to very concrete results. Now, the point is, if this is the situation, that what happened now recently, we say, I want to negotiate, I negotiate for 2 years, and I say, no, I cannot even find an agreement with my constituency on what has been negotiated. This is the end and the death of this kind of approach. I say it because it's not the first time, by the way. Now, coming back to your agreement, that brings me to the idea that we cannot just ignore it, and we have to do a bit more, because that's also, if we say, okay, you have negotiated on the basis of 155, but we will wait now, the whole process starting from scratch, and your thing is just waiting somewhere in the back, in a back room. Again, we are weakening Article 155, which is a core element of a very active social dialogue. Now we want to strengthen social dialogue. By doing that, we would definitely weaken it.
I guess also to mention the European Pillar of Social Rights, which came under the Juncker Commission also, right? That sort of is a good basis for this as well. Yes, Valeria.
Sorry, it's becoming around us three, but first of all, I think it's important to say we took 1 year, not 2 years. The result was dramatic, and I think you need to pay tribute that I am the only employer here who, I mean, so to say, though it was absolutely important that we answered to the many questions that not only the S&D but the whole Parliament had. I think that going back to Val Duchesse, I want also to make clear that my organization was the one insisting to have a declaration where we take a clear engagement. It's called the New Pact for Social Dialogue. You will see it when it's going to be published later today. We don't know yet what we will put in this pact. We have given us 1 year time. I know that this House is not friend of Article 154 and 55, and that's even more the reason why we need to deliver through these articles. So this pact will be our commitment to really make an analysis of what went wrong, why we have this kind of situation that was, as Nicola said, is not the first time we fail, and to avoid that this happen again. Because the answer is not cancel these articles of the treaty. The answer is make them work, and is for us to make them work. Final, I have just a joke, because Jan Willem continues to say that he doesn't have a private driver. It's our fault if he can't come and have a drive. We don't have a private, we just rented one for the occasion to be posh, but this guy doesn't want to take one more in the car. So poor Jan Willem. It's our fault, bad employees.
Which is a good moment to leave.
Yes.
Yes, right, right. Okay, you have to run, huh?
To find.
Thank you.
See you later.
Round of applause for Jan, please. Thank you. Thank you, Jan. And good luck at Val Duchesse. Thank you. Any other questions before, well, we have another, 7 minutes. Any questions, comments, additions, corrections to the notes, to the minutes? Yes, Ivalo.
Thank you, Chris. I would like to ask Commissioner Schmidt, but also Valeria. I mean, this is the second time social partners failed to agree on something, which I thought was very easy to agree, actually, because that was not so difficult file. Do you think that there will be another 25 years to wait for the next topic to be discussed, or there is something which now the social partners will wake up and see that it's better that they legislate than somebody else on their behalf, and put another topic on the agenda and again try to make this article work and do that? Is there such a topic? I could think of plenty of those, by the way, but it's my job to think about that. I don't know what would be realistic.
I have to say that this article is based on trust and confidence. If people consider that it's just another way to delay, then confidence is gone. So what we are doing now, and I thank very much SGI, by the way, for that, is trying to rebuild confidence in a working social dialogue, because it was hit by that. And I agree, this was a subject you could have more or less easily agreed upon. So the question is there the confidence? Because to negotiate, you need two, at least, the employer side and the union side. If one side, and let's say it's very often the union side now, considers that this is another way to negotiate and then to say, finally, no, it doesn't work, then there's a risk that this is gone. And this would be a pity for an active social dialogue. And I know there's a problem with the parliament because the parliament is not really in this. But on the other hand, here we can say the parliament is not, has been in, because the initiative comes from the parliament. So in this precise case, we cannot say the parliament is just out, because the parliament took the initiative. So in that sense, I would say it's even in a democratic perspective, it has been quite okay. Thank you.
So sooner than 25 years then, right?
Well, I do not want to.
Any other questions, comments? Yes, please. If you give your name first, please.
Thanks very much. My name is Sarah King, and I work in the Secretariat of the Workers' Group at the European Economic and Social Committee. It's more of a comment, really, just to maybe put a little bit more of a positive spin on things. I was also actually at the conference yesterday on mental health organized by the Belgian presidency. And in one of the workshops, we actually had some presentations from the sectoral social partners, EPSU and their employers' counterpart, HOSBEAM, and also from the construction sector. And I think in terms of the sectoral social dialogue, we see that actually there are a lot of good things happening in terms of agreements. And obviously yesterday the issue was about mental health and tackling that in the workforce. And so, of course, we are all extremely disappointed that, at the cross-sectoral level, the European social partners weren't able to sort of finalize the agreement on telework and the right to disconnect. But I think let's also remember that there is actually still good work happening in terms of the social dialogue and not forget that completely. Thanks.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, that's a very important point to make. EESC has a consultative role, and you got the grassroots there also among labor and business, so that's could be an important part of that dialogue. Our apologies to Jose Valera Ferrio with the UGT Spanish Trade Union, who we were connected momentarily, but we had a bit of a technical issue, so hopefully we can have him on another time. Any other questions, comments? I've got a question actually for the commissioner and maybe for everyone here is, with these elections approaching in June, does that not add a sense of urgency? Because we don't know what the parliament's going to look like after the election. Commissioner, do you want to comment on that? We don't know who's going to be in the parliament after this election. Maybe we should act now. And it could also become a political football, right?
I cannot agree more. We should act now. I have explained how things are, so we will not manage to have a proposal on the table in time and to give the Parliament the opportunity to vote on this proposal, to work on it, and all that. This is not possible. So I think we have now to go for the more complicated solution and hope that the next Parliament will still commit to what has been brilliantly prepared by the Parliament and especially by the rapporteur Alex. So that's all I can say.
Yes, Valeria. And I'd like to also hear from you after that. But no, go ahead.
I feel the need to say something for all of us, for all the negotiators. I can be very critical, but on this I really believe that all those who were around the negotiating table were there in good faith. I don't like this narrative about the on-purpose delaying. I think there was a major problem, much bigger than bad faith, is the inability, the lack of competence to negotiate anymore. It was not the first time we were failing. We had a series of failures, and we lost the habit of compromising. So to me, it's even worse than bad faith, and that's what we are going to rebuild, I hope, with this new path for social dialogue. But I don't buy the narrative of it was intentionally done, intentionally delayed. What is happening now is intentionally delaying. I'm a bit surprised that we have to undergo two-stage consultation. But it was not the intention, really, of the negotiators to delay it. It was a blunt failure because people didn't remember that when you have a mandate, it's your mandate, but then you have the other side and you have to compromise.
Okay. Hugues, does this discussion give you any hope?
Je pourrais pas être plus d'accord sur le fait que...
I agree that we have to speed up this work on a directive as soon as possible. I haven't followed the EU negotiations, of course, but if I look at negotiations in Belgium that we had on an inter-sectoral collective bargaining agreement, we have the same problems and the same discussions. So a harmonised directive at EU level would be good, so we could overcome the problems that workers face. We have the same problems at national level, so working time in general, rest time, holidays, working on Sundays, these are common problems. So we want a solution as soon as possible. Thank you.
I think we're done with this panel. A round of applause to the speakers. Thank you very much, Commissioner. Thank you. Vielen Dank. Bis zum nächsten Mal. Okay. And we'll have some final comments now, wrapping up with with Alex. And I want to pitch the same question to Alex about, well, I guess from what we heard from the commissioner and everyone else, how much more hope do you have on your birthday that you can get this kind of a present in a year at the next birthday party?
Chris, hope is the last thing that dies.
Yes, that's right.
So
That's what we say
this
in
has
the
been,
conflict
as I
zones.
said, a priority for our political family. And before we close down and wind up this event, thanks to you for moderating. Thanks for all the speakers, for all the stakeholders who are here with us discussing in an open way about the next steps forward when it comes to having a fully fledged piece of legislation on the right to disconnect. I think this was really important today to get a clearer picture of where we are standing. But we have been fighting for the last 4.5 years, both as an SND political group, as an employment and social affairs committee, but now also this has become a priority and we are aligned also on the right to disconnect as a European Parliament. The message is totally clear. My message is not that stakeholders are trying and social partners are trying to delay this process, but ultimately it is a pity that we don't have a college of commissioners who are all pushing in the same direction when it comes to social rights and advancing such a basic right in Europe. Statistical data is showing us very clearly where we are standing today. Therefore, there is no more time for postponement. There is no more time for procrastinating when it comes to taking the important decisions that we have to take. So for us, this will remain a priority. It is still on the table. It is still a priority for the European Commission. But come what may, even if there is a change in the political landscape in the Commission and also in the European Parliament in the next legislature, if we don't manage to do it in this legislature, this will remain a priority for our political family, and we will continue to fight for the right to disconnect as long as it takes, but this will remain our priority.
And Commissioner Smith said in the next few weeks, he hopes to see this dialogue start again. What's your approach there? You'll be involved, right?
Definitely, but we didn't want, our aim was not to have to re-kickstart, because this is not kickstarting the social dialogue. This is repeating the social dialogue that we already had and ending up with the same stumbling blocks that we already know that we are going to face, because we already faced them a couple of months ago. So what we really wanted, what we were expecting today, and that is why we named this conference today, there is no more time to waste, was not to kickstart the negotiations, the impact assessment, the negotiations, was to have Commissioner Schmidt, because ultimately this was the intention and this was the plea, not my plea as rapporteur, but this was the plea of the European Parliament a couple of weeks ago in the plenary from all different political groups. We weren't asking for re-kickstarting of the dialogue. We were asking for a proposal to be on the table, to start working on this proposal, to start negotiations in the European Parliament, in the Council, to have a right to disconnect directive applicable to all our workforce in the same way, to be enjoyed as soon as possible. So we will continue to push forward. There are stumbling blocks, but the courage is still there, the ambition is still there.
Good. And how much does this coming election in June add to the urgency to get this done?
It adds much more to the urgency, because we don't know what the political landscape will be in the next 6 months. So we know that there are a lot of forces who can and will definitely work against, not work against the idea of the right to disconnect, because there is convergence on the right to disconnect, and no political representative in the European Parliament or at member state level will speak against the right to disconnect. But definitely there are quarters and there are political movements at European level who are being lobbied to make the right to disconnect much more weaker. We don't want just a right to disconnect to be beautifully written down on paper, but we want an enforceable right to disconnect. We want strong elements on the right to disconnect when it comes to collective bargaining, when it comes to the reversal of burden of proof, when it comes to workers being able, and this is my last point, when it comes to workers to be able to enforce the right to disconnect, because it is useless. And we are seeing this happening in a number of member states who have already implemented the right to disconnect. It is useless to have a right to disconnect, but not giving our workforce the right tools to be able to enforce this right. So this is our priority, to have not just a right to disconnect, just to have something, or just to have a legislation on telework, because this is also one of our priorities, which is also enshrined in our proposal. But we want something which can be enforceable as the Working Time Directive, as fundamental as the Working Time Directive, because these are the realities that we are facing right now, and we don't want nice narrative, good narrative, we want actions.
Alex, Mr. Vice President of the S&D, thank you very much. And thanks to all of you for being here and giving your questions and comments. And please, your job is not done yet. Hashtag right to disconnect. Please get it on the social networks and cast this wider. My name is Chris Burns. See you next time.
Chris.
Thank you very much.
Well done. Huh? Yeah.